The air in the classroom shifts the moment she steps inside. Between the glittering silver hair and that perfectly polite tilt of her head, Akihito doesn't stand a chance. He's usually the guy fading into the wallpaper, but looking at Charlotte Bennett, he's forced to be honest with himself. To be blunt, it was love at first sight. Predictably, the piece lasts about 3 seconds before the guys in the back lose their collective minds. They aren't even trying to be subtle, practically jumping over desks to interrogate her about her relationship status. Akihito just watches the spectacle from the sidelines, leaning back with a heavy sigh as the room turns into a press conference for a girl who just wanted to sit down. Charlotte is already surrounded, a radiant sun in a room full of orbiting classmates. Akihito doesn't try to join the crowd, he's more comfortable in the shadows where nobody notices him. He opens a book, letting out a quiet breath as he disappears into his own world. He knows the hierarchy here. He isn't on great terms with the rest of the class, and if he stays in the line of fire, the social uproar will only get worse. He keeps his head down, shoulders tense, moving like a ghost through the hallway. The social noise is cut short when the teacher steps in. She notices the tension, the way the others are beginning to whisper and side-eye the boy in the corner. She calls him out under the guise of needing help, offering him a temporary escape route before the atmosphere turns truly toxic. Inside the reference room, the teacher drops the act. She knows he's getting bad-mouthed again, and this task is just a shield she built for him. Akihito appreciates the gesture, even if it feels a little like a punishment in disguise. She looks at him with a mix of pity and frustration, wishing she'd stepped in sooner, but Akihito just offers a small, tired smile. He doesn't mind the solitude anymore. It's safer than trying to fit into a room that doesn't want him. The silence of the hallway is shattered by a wail that echoes off the lockers. A little girl, barely tall enough to reach the door handles, is sobbing her heart out in a silver-haired panic. Through the tears, she screams for the only anchor she knows. "Where Lottie?" She bolts the moment she sees him, small sneakers slapping against the linoleum. Akihito rounds the corner to find her peeking out from behind a pillar, her eyes wide and rimmed with red. She's terrified, a tiny silver-haired ghost lost in a giant school. He crouches down, making himself small so he doesn't look like a threat. Slowly, the fear in her eyes melts into a hesitant curiosity. She doesn't just want to walk. She reaches out a trembling palm with a single, demanding word, "hand." It isn't enough to just hold his hand. She stops in her tracks, looking up with that absolute heartbreaking trust only a child can muster. Her arms reach toward the ceiling as she delivers the final command of her surrender. Up. He ends up carrying her all the way to the faculty room, Emma clinging to his neck like a baby koala. When the teacher asks what happened, Akihito explains he found her crying on the street. This is Emma-chan, and right now Akihito is the only person she's willing to trust. The door bangs open with a violence that makes everyone jump. Charlotte is standing there, her refined composure gone, hair disheveled and skin slick with sweat. She's gasping for air, her voice cracking as she screams into the room, "Where's Emma?" The shock hits both of them at once, the transfer student and the school loner, linked by the tiny girl currently strangling Akihito with a hug. Charlotte can hardly believe it's him, but Emma's grip is like iron. It seems she's become quite fond of her rescuer. Charlotte tries to pry her away, but Emma isn't having it. She digs her fingers into Akihito's shirt, her face scrunched up in a stubborn, tearful pout. She doesn't just want a goodbye, she wants the whole package. Go home with Oni-chan. Akihito and Charlotte freeze, both of their brains short-circuiting at the exact same moment. The transfer student, the girl the entire grade has been worshipping from afar, is currently standing in front of Akihito's desk, with her face turning a vivid shade of pink. She's clenching her hands over her heart, looking less like an untouchable idol and more like a girl about to jump off a cliff. She manages to choke out the words, "Come home with us." Akihito's brain immediately exits the building, leaving him staring at her with wide, vacant eyes, while he wonders if he accidentally slipped into a coma during second period. Somehow, this isn't a dream. He's actually walking out of the school gates with the most beautiful girl in class. But any romantic tension is immediately hijacked by the tiny silver-haired weight currently anchoring itself to his leg. Emma is looking up at him with the intensity of a baby bird that just decided he's the mother, and Charlotte can only watch with a helpless, shaky smile as her sister completely rejects her for the guy she just met. Emma isn't satisfied with just holding hands anymore. She stops dead in her tracks, reaches up with both arms, and drops a single, non-negotiable command. Up, Charlotte lunges in, trying to be the voice of reason and protect Akihito from being treated like a pack mule. But Emma just gives her the most aggressive headshake in history. She knows what she wants, and it's not her sister's arms. When the stubbornness doesn't work, Emma brings out the big guns, the watery, trembling bottom lip look. It's psychological warfare, and Akihito is the primary casualty. He scoops her up before the first tear can even hit the pavement, desperately trying to reassure a flustered Charlotte that he honestly doesn't mind the extra weight. The walk settles into a rhythm that feels dangerously domestic. Charlotte watches him with a soft, lingering gaze, her voice dropping to a gentle murmur as she tells him how kind he is. It's the kind of direct praise that makes a loner like Akihito want to phase through the sidewalk, especially while Emma mumbles from his shoulder about not understanding a word the adults are saying. Emma has officially entered full spoiled kitten mode. She's nuzzling into Akihito's neck, practically purring as she rubs her cheek against his shirt with a satisfied little grin. Charlotte looks like she's witnessing a glitch in reality. Her sister, the one who usually finds everyone difficult, is currently trying to merge souls with the boy from class. The shock is finally wearing off, leaving Charlotte in a state of quiet wonder. She reaches out, gently stroking Emma's hair as the girl drifts off against Akihito's chest. She admits she's never seen Emma get this attached to anyone outside the family, leaving the question hanging in the air. What exactly is it about Akihito that makes a child feel this safe? Charlotte doesn't hold back, looking him right in the eye to deliver the verdict. The fact is, Oyagi-kun is really kind. The words land with more impact than a physical blow. Before he can even process the compliment, Charlotte's face ignites, and she starts a frantic, high-speed retreat, physically distancing herself as her brain catches up to what she just said. Akihito takes her sudden exit as a sign of disgust, his internal monologue spiraling into a pit of gloom. He's convinced he's made her uncomfortable, while Charlotte is actually 10 steps ahead of him, clutching her burning cheeks and trying to explain that she isn't running away because she dislikes him. It's the exact opposite problem. Charlotte slows down, her voice trembling with a mix of guilt and sincerity. She apologizes for dragging him into this, for making him the villain of the class gossip mill just because of her sister's whims. But Akihito just looks at her, the usual loner defenses dropping for a second, and tells her he only did what he wanted to do. They reach a sleek, modern apartment complex, the kind of place that feels worlds away from Akihito's quiet life. As they ride the elevator up to the third floor, a strange silence falls over them, punctuated only by the soft step of their shoes on the carpeted hallway. Charlotte is grinning now, a playful, secretive look dancing in her eyes. Charlotte pulls out her key, the metallic keychack of the lock echoing in the quiet corridor. Akihito stands there with the sleeping Emma in his arms, looking back and forth between Charlotte's door and the one right next to it. A cold sweat starts to break across his forehead as the geometry of the hallway finally starts to make sense. She swings the door open, but she doesn't go inside yet. She turns back, framed by the light of her new home, her silver hair shimmering as she drops the final revelation of the day with a shy, triumphant smile. "I'm actually living in the apartment next to yours, Oyagi-kun." The teacher's cryptic warnings finally click into place. This wasn't an accident. It was an ambush of pure, concentrated good luck. As the sun sets, casting long shadows over the city, Akihito realizes his life as a quiet loner hasn't just been interrupted. It's been completely overwritten by the girl next door. Akihito's sanctuary has been breached. The loner's lair is currently hosting the class idol and a small silver-haired hurricane. Charlotte steps in with a grace that makes the cheap flooring look like marble, her voice soft and apologetic. "Pardon the intrusion." Emma isn't interested in manners, though. She's already scoping out the room, her eyes locking onto Akihito like a heat-seeking missile for cuddles. There is no buffer zone. Before he can even offer a seat, Emma has launched herself into his lap, settling in with a satisfied "ee-hee." Charlotte is mortified, her hands hovering as if she can somehow physically reel her sister back in. "Emma-chan?" Her voice is a mix of panic and utter disbelief at how quickly her sister has claimed this boy. Charlotte tries to be the voice of reason, but to a determined child, logic is just noise. Emma's bottom lip wobbles, the ultimate weapon of mass destruction. She turns her big shimmering eyes toward her target, whispering the word that seals his fate. "Oni-chan." It's not just a name, It's an unconditional surrender to her cuteness. Akihito is a goner. He gives in instantly, telling them they can stay as long as they want, which leads to Charlotte's brain short-circuiting in the most adorable way. She looks at the available seating, which is mostly Akihito, and drops a question that nearly sends him to the hospital. "May I sit as well?" He catches the implication a second too late, his face turning a shade of red that shouldn't be biologically possible. He manages to stammer out a correction, the floor. She should sit on the floor before his heart actually explodes. They settle into a tense but domestic peace across the low table, a distance that Akihito desperately needs to breathe. But Emma isn't done with him, her small hand clutching his shirt as if to remind him that he's currently her favorite person in the world. Emma's demands are simple. She just wants to play with her new Oni-chan. Charlotte watches them, her expression a mix of gratitude and genuine puzzlement at her sister's sudden change in personality. It's a side of Emma she hasn't seen in a long time, and it's all because of the boy who just wanted to be left alone. Dominoes, apparently. That's the game of choice. Charlotte heads back to her apartment to grab a set, leaving Akihito alone with the little girl who's currently treating him like a human chair. He asks Emma if she likes her sister, and the answer is as pure as it gets. "Yep, I really like her." Even in her spoiled moments, the bond between the two sisters is clear, and Akihito can't help but smile at the warmth of it. The game is ready. The tiles are out, and Emma has absolutely no intention of playing. She pouts, pushing the dominoes away and reaching out with both arms for the only thing she actually wants: hug. The game of dominoes has been officially postponed in favor of Akihito cuddles, and Charlotte can only watch with a helpless, amused smile. It turns out Emma is a spectator, not a player. She doesn't want to line them up. She wants to watch Akihito do the hard work for her. She sits there, vibrates with excite energy, and waits for the show to begin. Charlotte giggles, noting that Akihito is already doing a great job of spoiling her little sister. The line is perfect, a rhythmic trail of black and white tiles snaking across the table. Emma's eyes go wide as she watches the work progress, her face breaking into a smile so radiant it feels like it could light up the entire apartment building. In this moment, Akihito isn't the class outcast. He's a hero with a very specific set of stacking skills. Charlotte admits she hasn't seen Emma this happy in ages, and the credit goes entirely to the boy currently blushing under her praise. With a single decisive flick, the first tile falls. A rhythmic clack 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 fills the room, and Emma leaps forward, her joy overflowing as she watches the chaos she and her Oni-chan created together. The clatter dies down, leaving a silence that's much softer than before. Emma's energy, once a hurricane, suddenly hits a wall. She leans her head against Akihito's chest with a soft poof, her eyes fluttering closed. She's completely wiped out, using the boy she just met as the world's most comfortable pillow. Akihito is drowning in wholesome energy. He thinks he might be the luckiest guy on the planet, but Charlotte corrects him. Emma is the lucky one for finding someone as kind as him. Then, with her last bit of waking strength, Emma delivers the finishing blow. Emma loves Oni-chan. It's a declaration of pure, unadulterated affection that hits Akihito harder than any punch ever could. The weight of the moment is too much. Akihito actually has to turn away, his eyes stinging with tears he never thought he'd shed for anyone. He hides his face in a tissue, blowing his nose as Emma sings a tiny, incoherent song about dominoes. Across the table, Charlotte watches him with a gaze that is growing softer by the second. It's time to go. Charlotte scoops up the sleeping child, her expression full of a sister's deep gratitude. She explains that Japan has been a scary, silent place for Emma, who doesn't speak the language yet. To Emma, Akihito wasn't just a boy in the park. He was the hero who reached out when everything was terrifying and unknown. That's why she won't let him go. Charlotte stands at the threshold, the sleeping weight of her sister in her arms. She looks at Akihito, her silver hair catching the hall light, and asks the question that will change his quiet life forever. Will you be Emma's playmate? It's a plea for help, wrapped in a request for connection, and the vulnerability in her eyes makes it impossible to say no. Akihito's brain is doing gymnastics. He has goals, he has studies, and his solitude was supposed to be his fortress. But as he looks at Charlotte, the girl who always puts herself last, trying so hard to be a good sister in a foreign land, his walls just crumble. He can't turn his back on someone who's going out of her way to ask for his help. He gives her a shaky sure, promising to help as much as his schedule allows. Charlotte's face lights up with a thank you so genuine it feels like a physical warmth. But as they move toward the door, Akihito asks a simple question about their parents that makes the air in the hallway turn cold. Charlotte doesn't hesitate, but her answer is sharp and heavy. No one's coming back. The realization hits them both at the same time. Akihito admits he lives alone too, a fact that stops Charlotte in her tracks. Live alone? Even though you're still in high school? They are 3 people in 2 apartments, all navigating a world that doesn't seem to have any adults in it. The silence stretches between them, heavy with the weight of shared isolation. And then, the universe decides the mood is far too serious. Akihito's stomach lets out a roar that echoes through the quiet hallway, betraying the fact that he hasn't eaten a bite all evening. He tries to laugh it off, saying he'll just hit the convenience store. But Charlotte looks at her phone. It's nearly 10. She isn't about to let her new hero wander the streets on an empty stomach. She makes up her mind in a heartbeat, her eyes bright and determined as she looks him in the face. I'll make you a meal. Akihito's brain finally hits a critical error. The most beautiful girl he's ever seen is standing in his doorway, offering to cook for him, and his only internal response is a flashing sign that says Head Elpney. He hesitates, which is a tactical error. Charlotte immediately pivots to a sad look, her eyes drooping as if he's just crushed her spirit. You don't want me to? It's a flawless maneuver. Akihito caves instantly, the words tumbling out before he can stop them. Please, do, as if he could ever refuse a girl who's currently rewriting every rule of his lonely life. Akihito is currently trying to convince his brain that this isn't a hallucination. There is a kitchen knife in his apartment, and it's being held by a girl who looks like she stepped out of a high-end fashion magazine. He flinches as she spins around with a smile that's far too bright for his dimly lit living room. She's checking for allergies, but he's barely processing the question, his voice cracking as he shouts, "No, I'll eat pretty much anything." She tilts her head, her long silver hair catching the light as she catches him staring. She leans in, catching his eye with a playful curiosity. "Why are you so flustered?" He looks away, his face burning, muttering that it's nothing while the rhythmic rattle of her cooking fills the space he usually occupies alone. Nearby, Emma has completely surrendered to the Sandman, a tiny trail of drool making her look like the world's most peaceful hostage. Akihito reaches out, his fingers hovering as he wipes the mess away, feeling a sudden surge of protectiveness for this little family that's crashed into his life. He thinks he's alone in the moment until a cold chill runs down his spine. Charlotte is right there, her hands suddenly pressing against his cheek, her voice a low, melodic warning. "You're not allowed to play a prank, you know?" He freezes, his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. She doesn't pull away, she just watches him with those shimmering eyes, enjoying the way he's completely paralyzed by a simple touch. She finally lets out a soft, airy laugh, admitting she just wanted to see him jump. He manages to stammer out that she definitely succeeded, his pulse still refusing to settle down. Akihito tries to regain his dignity, noting that she's surprisingly mischievous for someone who looks so refined. She doesn't deny it. Instead, she hides her hands behind her back, her grin widening into something softer, more intentional. She looks back at him over her shoulder, the distance between them suddenly feeling very small. "Maybe it's because it's you that I want to play pranks on." Before he can decode what that's supposed to mean, she's already pivoting back to the table. The spread is incredible, steaming rice, perfectly rolled tamagoyaki, and a side of stir-fry that smells like heaven. She invites him to dig in, but as he picks up his chopsticks, he can't stop the internal gear grinding. He takes a deep breath, wondering just how much of her mischief is meant to be taken seriously. One bite is all it takes for the world to stop spinning. The flavor hits him with a warmth that has nothing to do with the temperature of the food. He's practically glowing as he mumbles how delicious it is, shoveling the rice in like he hasn't eaten in days. Charlotte watches him, her chin resting on her hands, her gaze steady and unblinking. She isn't eating, she's just savoring the sight of him being cared for. Between mouthfuls, Akihito asks if she cooks Japanese food often. She admits she's a fan of the cuisine, but looks a bit disappointed that she couldn't make her first choice, nikujaga. He's confused by the specific craving until she claps her hands together, her eyes sparkling with a terrifyingly wholesome determination. It's the dish that Japanese men love the most. He nearly chokes on his rice. He's never heard that statistic in his life, but the way she says it with such earnest hope that he'd like it makes his face heat up all over again. He wonders where on earth she's getting her intel on Japanese dating habits, but he isn't exactly about to complain. He just keeps eating, the steam from the food blurring the edges of his lonely apartment into something that finally feels like home. The dishes are stacked, the meal finished, but the atmosphere remains heavy with unspoken thanks. Akihito rubs his stomach, truly full for the first time in weeks, while Charlotte waves off his gratitude. She looks over at the sleeping Emma, her expression softening into something fragile. She whispers that if she had actually lost her tonight, she doesn't think she would have ever recovered. The weight of that reality settles between them, cold and sharp. Akihito listens as she voices her darkest fears that a girl as striking as Emma stands out too much, making her an easy target for anyone with bad intentions. She's spiraling into the what-ifs, her eyes searching his for some kind of confirmation. He doesn't look away, he just listens to the tremor in her voice as she asks if standing out is really that dangerous. Is that so? He doesn't sugarcoat it, but he offers a different perspective. He explains that while standing out has its risks, it also means there are more eyes on her, more people who would notice if something was wrong. He reminds her that for every person with bad intentions, there are a dozen others who would help a lost child. Charlotte stares at him, her lips parting as the tension leaves her shoulders. A soft, genuine smile breaks across her face. Aoyagi-kun, you really are kind. He tries to brush it off, saying anyone would have done the same, but she isn't letting him retreat into his shell. She leans forward, her gaze direct and unwavering. She points out that he didn't just help. He saw her anxiety and worked to fix it. She knows the difference between a polite facade and genuine care. She looks him right in the eye, her voice firm. Aoyagi-kun, you are the latter. Akihito is floored. He stammers that he doesn't have anything to give her in return for such high praise. She laughs, a playful sparkle returning to her eyes as she leans in closer. She doesn't want gifts or money, she just looks at him, the world around them seemingly blooming into light. I would be happy if it was your friendship. The warmth of the evening lingers as she prepares to head back to her own apartment. She stops at the door, the mundane sight of her shoes on his mat a reminder of how much has changed in a single day. He thinks they've reached a new level of understanding until she turns back. Her expression suddenly unreadable, almost cold. The playful girl is gone, replaced by a distance that makes his blood run cold. Could you not talk to me at school for a while? The warmth of that home-cooked meal hasn't even faded before Akihito shatters the mood. He stands there, casual as anything, while he drops a request that feels like a social execution. Starting tomorrow, could you not talk to me at school for a while? Charlotte freezes, her breath hitching as the confusion floods her eyes. Why? He's already thinking 3 steps ahead, worrying about the fallout if the class finds out they're neighbors. He wants to avoid trouble, but for Charlotte, the logic doesn't stop the sting. She forces a smile, her voice dropping to a soft, resigned whisper. It'll be a bit lonely, but I'll do it. Back at her own place, the silence feels heavier than usual. She watches Emma sleep, her fingers gently brushing silver hair as she stares at the wall separating her from the boy next door. Inside the teacher's lounge, Hanazawa-sensei is reviewing files when the topic shifts to her most notorious student. She flashes a grin that's half mischief and half affection. And also the school's #1 problem child. But not everyone sees him as a delinquent. Sasagawa-sensei steps in with a calm, corrective smile, placing a hand on Charlotte's arm. Aoyagi-kun is the most excellent student in this school, you know. Hanazawa-sensei doesn't back down, calling him a prodigy, but not a genius. It's a distinction that leaves Charlotte tilting her head in confusion. A prodigy, but not a genius? The teacher's tone shifts, becoming grounded and sincere. She tells Charlotte that despite the labels, Akihito is the one person who will never abandon someone in need. Then the real lesson begins. Hanazawa-sensei leans in, her eyes sharpening with an intensity that demands attention. Oyagi's word isn't something to always take at face value. He doesn't act on impulse. He acts on consequence. If he says something that makes him look bad, it's usually because it makes someone else look better. Just gotta read between the lines. Charlotte is connecting the dots. If he's hiding his true self to protect others, he's not a problem child, he's a martyr. She asks why tell her all this. Only for the teacher to claim it's just feminine intuition. The atmosphere snaps from philosophical to chaotic in a heartbeat. Miyu-sensei lunges into view with all the subtlety of a car crash. It's called a woman's intuition. The staff room has descended into pure chaos. Miyu is literally trying to crush Hanazawa-sensei's skull while shouting about being called by her first name. Charlotte just watches, her eyes wide, as she realizes her school life is turning into a gag manga. Watch, Hanazawa-sensei tries to shock Charlotte with a joke about Miyu liking girls, but the silver-haired transfer student doesn't miss a beat. She calmly points out that love is love, leaving the teacher speechless. Miyu is currently hovering between life and death after the head crushing, a tiny soul practically floating out of her mouth. Hanazawa-sensei just waves it off. Shouldn't you let go of her now? As Charlotte prepares to leave, the teacher drops one last teasing bomb. She suggests that since she's come all this way to Japan, she should find a boyfriend. Charlotte practically jumps out of her skin. The girl is bright red, her hands shielding her face as she stammers a denial. Hanazawa-sensei watches with a predatory grin, thinking that this level of pure innocence is exactly what would drive the boys crazy. She's a total disaster. The refined transfer student is currently reduced to a blushing mess, her voice a tiny, high-pitched squeal as she tries to hide from the world. Miyu-sensei finally recovers enough to fire back, pointing out that Hanazawa hasn't had much luck in the boyfriend department either. This workspace is about to become a war zone again. The teachers are still at each other's throats, sparks practically flying as they trade insults. Charlotte makes her escape, slipping out while the woman's intuition war rages on. Hanazawa watches her go, a knowing smirk playing on her lips as she taps the doorframe. That kid, the teacher thinks that maybe, just maybe, this girl can be the one to break through Akihito's walls. Charlotte walks through the halls, her mind replaying every moment of kindness he's shown her. Back in her own bed, Charlotte grips her pillow, the silence of the room amplifying her thoughts. He's kind, kinder than anyone knows, but he's also a mystery she's desperate to solve. She stares into the dark, his warning about avoiding trouble echoing in her head. I wonder what he meant by that. In the stuffy quiet of the classroom, the teacher lets out a heavy sigh over a mountain of paperwork. Akihito watches from the sidelines, thinking that dealing with all that looks like a total pain, but his peace is short-lived. He feels a gaze burning into the side of his head. Charlotte is looking right at him. So much for keeping a low profile. Charlotte breaks the distance with a bright, energetic wave that practically glows. Akihito's hands fly up in a silent, desperate signal to stop, his mind racing with a panicked, "No, not good." The social spotlight is the last thing he wants. But the teacher has other plans. She calls out over the heads of the curious students with a polite but firm request. Akihito's throat goes dry as he swallows hard, forced to follow her out under the watchful eyes of the class, while she tells the rest to just bear with me for a second. Safe in the hallway, Miyu-sensei drops the professional act instantly. She's got a front-row seat to the drama and she isn't letting him off the hook, teasing him about Charlotte's obvious affection. Akihito starts sweating bullets, desperately trying to maintain his cover even as she hits him with the killing blow. "You were grinning like an idiot, you know." She leans in close, her eyes searching his for the truth he's trying to bury. She saw right through the mask to the softness underneath, whispering a quiet accusation. "Your eyes were smiling." He can only stammer back a defense, begging her not to make him sound like a creep. The playful banter fades into something heavier. Miyu-sensei puts a hand on his shoulder, entrusting him with Charlotte's safety because she knows the world isn't always kind to someone like her. Akihito tries to brush it off, but he can't stop the image of Charlotte's glowing face from flooding his mind. That smile is officially stuck in his head. He agrees to keep an eye out, prompting a soft sigh of relief from Miyu. She mumbles about how much easier life would be if everyone shared his heart, but as he turns to leave, she stops him. There's one more thing she needs to say, the real reason she pulled him aside. Miyu's voice drops, warning him not to lose himself in his selflessness. Akihito stands perfectly still, his silhouette heavy against the hallway light, as he reveals the shadow he's been running from. The words are quiet, final, and full of a weight no high schooler should carry. "I have to atone for what I've done." Miyu challenges him, asking if he really thinks making others happy will fix the past. She reminds him that he was a victim too, but Akihito just thinks of Akira, the boy who truly suffered to him. His own well-being is a fair trade for someone else's smile. He treats his trauma like a fortress and tells her not to pry, but Miyu isn't an outsider who takes orders. She stares him down, her stubbornness matching his own as she makes a promise he can't ignore. She has absolutely zero intention of staying out of his business. The tension breaks with a sudden soft apology. She reaches out, her hand resting gently on his hair in a gesture of pure comfort. Her voice is a whisper of concern as she points out the obvious. You're carrying way too many burdens on your shoulders. He tries to laugh it off, pretending it's not as hard as it looks, but Miyu is already walking away with a secret smile. She's seen enough today to be convinced of one thing: his way of thinking will eventually change. She just doesn't know how long it'll take to break those walls down. Back at the apartment, the heavy shadows of the past are replaced by the weight of a very persistent little sister. Emma is practically vibrating as she clutches her storybook, staring up at Charlotte with huge, pleading eyes. Lottie, I want to play with Oni-chan. Charlotte tries to be the voice of reason, explaining that they can't be a bother every single day. Emma's response is immediate and adorable, the ultimate puff-cheeked pout. Even the world's cutest HMMPH isn't enough to sway Charlotte this time. It's time for the big guns, bribery. Charlotte promises that being a good girl today means more playtime later, then pivots to a shopping trip. Emma's mood flips in a heartbeat, her pout disappearing as she jumps to her feet with an enthusiastic nod. Shoes are on, Velcro is secured, and Emma is locked and loaded for their outing. She grabs Charlotte's hand with a determined little look, ready to conquer the grocery store. Okay, let's go. Charlotte looks down at their joined hands, her heart warming. Emma is picky. She usually only trusts her sister or her mom, but Akihito managed to break that rule in record time. He's a special exception, and Charlotte can't help but wonder what kind of family raised someone so naturally kind. Charlotte blinks, and in that split second, the world changes. The hand she was holding is empty. Panic surges as she spins around, her internal monologue screaming, "She's gone!" Emma hasn't gone far. She's launched a tactical siege on the neighbor's door. Armed with a broom as a makeshift pole, she's jabbing the doorbell with every ounce of her toddler strength. Take that, huff! The bell rings, sealing Emma's victory just as Charlotte lunges to grab her. It's a full-on struggle in the hallway, Emma wailing that Lottie is being so mean, while Charlotte desperately tries to drag her away before they become a nuisance. The door clicks open, and Akihito stands there, completely baffled by the chaos on his porch. He doesn't even have time to process it before Emma launches herself forward. She's a silver-haired missile of pure affection, locking her arms around him with a joyous cry. Ah, Oni-chan! The wall of distance he tried so hard to build at school has officially crumbled into dust. Akihito looks at a beet-red Charlotte and offers a shy invitation into his home. She can only offer a quiet, blushing susurr as the selfish angel Emma celebrates her successful invasion.